Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and look what we have on the table today. Wow, does this bring back some good memories here on the channel when we played through the ISS Vanguard prototype number 1 during the GameFound campaign. And as you can see, another prototype demo has arrived. This is, in my opinion, version 2.0. Essentially, there's been some major changes that have happened inside of the gameplay, as well as how some of the structuring of the initial journey into ISS Vanguard pans out and teaches you the game. There's also been small elemental changes within the gameplay, plus of course artwork. But long story short, this prototype right here is still not final, so don't think of this as the final product. Everything here is still subject to change. What I'm excited to do in this video, without any extras added in, is just go over the high-level changes straight from Awaken Realms as to what has changed in ISS Vanguard. And then what I'm going to do is pose to you guys a question. Should we journey back into ISS Vanguard for an upcoming playthrough? Let me know by liking this video and in the comments below letting me know that you're interested. I'm going to gauge based on that input whether we should move into a playthrough or not. So definitely make your voice heard there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check out all the highlight major changes for prototype 2.0. And just before we go ahead with that first major change, I want to show you all kinds of paperwork, binders, coil-bound books, and smaller booklets inside the box. Again, everything's in prototype form. There's been an introduction of a new set of dice combination symbols that you can likely notice from these stacks of dice here, and they are going to allow you to change up your roll in terms of what you're able to accomplish after resolving your roll. So before you clean up your dice, you're going to be able to use various combos of these icons and be able to use them on planet boards as well as cards that you have for your character to set yourself up for some combos that weren't available in prototype 1.0. Now, to show you how that new and expanded dice play rolls into the Planet book, as we've opened it up here to Everstorm, you'll see multiple different points of interest, and we'll be touching more on this book and how it's changed as well, because there have been a lot of graphical updates to how this is structured now. But you'll notice that there are some points of interest that have some different ways of resolving your dice play. So many points of interest are now going to start including tracks that can be progressed in different ways, which are going to lead to a variety of new tactical situations. Now, back in December with the original prototype that I did, basically every roll came down to 2 static targets you were going after. You were trying to get either a basic success and potentially a bonus out of that if you were lucky enough. But now what's going to happen is some rolls are going to actually progress with every occurrence of a certain symbol or color during your roll, opening up a whole bunch of new strategies, and that is going to make large, satisfying dice rolls much more frequent within ISS Vanguard. Let's move on to the next major change, and that is around the planet board and how everything is structured here. You are now going to notice much better iconography around the game board than you did before. You're going to notice that paths are now easily marked. The iconography has been made larger. The coloring, the graphic design, all that kind of stuff has changed immensely for the better. You'll notice that on the outlines of the edges of the pages, you've got areas to help organize cards with dedicated slots for unique mechanics that are specific to the planet. So in this case, we have a number of discoveries marked on this side. Taking a look at the right-hand side of the Everstorm planet board, you'll notice threats at the very top. Again, you're going to have designated slots for these. On the planet board itself, there's also been changes. The unique discovery there and the mission card were there from the original prototype, but lost discoveries is a new entry. Again, all in an aim to ensure you have all your cards in organized, dedicated slots either on the planet board or around it. Seeing as we've touched on planet board upgrades and iconography, we might as well talk about the next major change, and that is colorblind and just general readability improvements. You'll notice that reading the planet board itself now is much easier. This has also been changed on the cards, the character boards, everything else inside the prototype as well, to make sure that it's easily readable and also colors are able to be differentiated much more clearly. Specific to the dice in ISS Vanguard, colorblind-friendly markings were also placed in the corners to make it easier to tell the colors apart, and some of the confusing symbols inside of the game itself have been completely removed. It's also worth mentioning, and I'm sure a bunch of you are wondering, where are those glitter-filled dice that look so good? Well, in this prototype, again, these are not the final dice, but regardless, I don't have those wonderful and what look to be glitter-infused ISS Vanguard dice as part of this prototype, but you can be sure that those dice are really going to stand out on the table. Another major change that ties into the planet board is around the global conditions. This deck right here. You'll remember from the original prototype playthrough that I did that when you were on a particular planet, there were special event cards that were used that would kick up things like dust storms or volcanic eruptions on the planet itself. Well, what's happened now is that Awaken Realms has rolled all of that into one standard global conditions mechanic. Basically, each planet is going to have its own global conditions deck, and that is going to actually change after time based on key story beats as you go through. So you may see conditions on the planet change based on your actions or as the story and narrative pan out. Here's an example of a number of different global conditions that you can run into. Gamma flashes, you have geothermal eruptions, low visibility, hatching season, among a number of others. These global conditions are going to affect everybody in play. It's also worth noting that they're going to present opportunities that may or may not be dangerous as you travel around the planet board. Remember, when you're talking global conditions, there is a big time effect on the ability to move around the planet. So as a result of all of this, players are going to have to change and adapt their plans depending on the current global conditions or maybe even the anticipated ones. The next major change is around the front section of the gameplay and even existing planets, story, and artwork. This prototype includes 2 new planet boards that were not there in prototype 1.0, and likely as I went through them in the past few clips, you noticed which ones those are. And there was significant rework even to some of these original known planets at the very beginning of the game. The logbook now is 4 times the size of the one that came with the prototype in December. Here's a look at the logbook. It is version 0.95, and of course in the final version this will be much better looking, but it has gotten significantly thicker. This logbook is for the entire first act of the campaign, so it's from the moment Vanguard arrives at God's coordinates through some dramatic events that shape the fate of the whole Earth, up to the cliffhanger that concludes the first 1/3 of the story campaign. The next major change inside of ISS Vanguard prototype number 2 is the whole brand new starting experience. Now, that previous prototype, which I covered, introduced rules and really all of the rules over a single planetary exploration and a single ship phase. This really was quite a bit to take in all at once. So what ends up happening now is it's been restructured in order to occur that same amount of information across a number of different planets and ship phases, which I think is going to allow individuals to get into this a lot easier and also enjoy the gameplay that much more without putting too much out in front at the beginning of the gameplay. So the first planet is going to introduce just basic movement and roles. The first ship phase is going to introduce only several core ship book pages instead of absolutely everything, and we will be taking a look inside this ship book momentarily. The second planet introduces supplies, leads, and we'll talk about leads in a bit as well, and real injuries. The second ship phase introduces the remaining ship book pages that weren't covered in the first ship phase, and then the third planet introduces threats and dangerous landings. So again, everything's layered on and the learning comes with time versus everything up front. Now let's jump inside of the shipbook and show you some changes that have occurred. You'll remember the inside of the binder itself in the original prototype had dials all along the side here. Now for mass production, that is pretty tricky. Plus there were issues with even opening and closing the binder with those dials in the way. So those dials now have their own spot separate, and you can place them anywhere around the game board. Those panels will keep track of a number of different things like assembly, science, respawns, energy, and manufacturing, making life a lot easier for you. You'll see there's also a chart here on the side: start, arrival, unloading, medbay. This is going to walk you through everything inside the shipbook phase by phase. Similar to how the shipbook was learned previously, there's also full sections here of information to understand which section you're moving into and what the requirements are, as well as any terms. And I'll show you a couple pages and one major change with this shipbook, and that comes around the pre-filling of cards inside of it. Now, in the original prototype, there was cards slotted in that you just started with automatically. What they've done in this new reintroduction to ISS Vanguard is those cards, nothing is slotted in. It also makes manufacturing much better, because having cards pre-slotted into a binder is a very tricky task. So it's much better to have the players do this through learning at the very beginning of the game. And that change I definitely like, because the first time I opened the binder, it was a bit tricky to understand why certain cards were in certain positions from the get-go. Another thing worth mentioning inside the shipbook is how these arrows have changed. I remember in the first prototype there were some arrows set up that didn't really make any sense in terms of how you're supposed to move the cards from one stage to the next. All that stuff has now been ironed out in this 2.0 upgrade, and I like the look of it much better. You'll see there's iconography updates everywhere where it makes the most sense. Here's the memorial wall, so an example of that. Moving on through, we got the bridge and all the ship upgrades that are involved, the situation room. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on here, but I really, truly like the fact that this binder's empty from the start. So it really gives you that feel of actually populating it yourself and then understanding why you're doing that in the first place. Another correction that I noticed already is in terms of these percentage completes. They now actually make sense in terms of the direction they're going, as well as the actual percentage as well. So starting it off in the queue and then moving through stage 1 at 20%, stage 2 60, stage 3 90, and then onwards from there. That was one of the things I believe in the original prototype that had some issues in terms of the flow. Skipping all the way to the back of the book here, we have a planetary exploration procedure, phases 1, 2, 3, and 4 all labeled out. The next major change was around leads in a bag. So they've replaced the 5 lead decks, you'll remember from the first prototype, with a lead token bag instead. So these tokens you're seeing on screen all have different bonuses and values, which will lead to more dynamic play overall. They also taper out naturally as the planet progresses, so you can always get a new discovery, but every subsequent discovery after that's going to be harder to get. And on top of that, replacing the 5 small decks, which took up a ton of real estate, and just management of those extra card decks beyond the ones that are already included in the game, is going to reduce the overall setup and teardown time, as well as table clutter in general. You'll remember from the first prototype we had these large cards where all the action happens in regards to your ship, but also inside the shipbook there are now going to be cards that are specifically sized to be sleeved in there rather than the larger ones here. And I'll show you the example of them down below here, and it's going to summarize up what you just saw on that other sheet in a much more simplistic way. And again, these will be used inside the shipbook. The next major change in this prototype is around development of the threats, further development. As you remember from the first prototype, threats back then were just another type of point of interest with minimal function, but now most of them are actually built with simple AI that moves and acts on the board depending on the time token progression and the player's action. Here are some examples of them, and it's worth noting that when we saw the planet board, there was that designated position for threats in the top right-hand corner just above the planet board. That's going to do it for the major changes of the ISS Vanguard prototype, but there were a ton of smaller fixes and tuning and decluttering and just overall quality of life upgrades you're going to see across the game. And these are going to include things like a new liftoff action, as well as a new preparation action, changing supplies into a lander track, moving system maps into a single book, as you can see right here. Having all these system maps inside of a coil-bound book is a great idea, plus the size of the actual sheets have been changed as well, so it's much easier to handle on the table. Now, the shipbook that we took a look at earlier had the rules completely rewritten for clarity as well. There's numbered shipbook cards, which makes finding things a lot faster and easier. There's info about the gameplay consequences of research and production projects or ship situations that now eliminates the blind guessing and removing those nested rolls that you had throughout the game. Now, the December prototype had way too many situations where you would trigger a new roll in the middle of a roll. This caused a lot of confusion, so they have conducted a lot of internal tests to remove that element and add in only elements that result in the most fun in terms of the dice rolling and the timing of when that actually occurs. The card refreshes have been checked and worked over as well. The length of the planetary exploration has been looked at, and the amount of starting resources. It's also worth mentioning inside of this prototype that I actually found a bag of standees, so instead of miniatures, you now have that option as well. Awaken Realms has confirmed that this prototype really does test the final core rule set and crucial first hours of the game on the largest possible group of players. If everything goes well in the test, the first 10 to 20 hours of the final core box campaign will be very similar to the experience presented in this prototype. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up this overview of ISS Vanguard 2.0, the prototype. You've seen almost everything that came inside this box. The major things you didn't see were around the cards. And the reason I didn't show you those is because, again, if this ends up being the very beginning portion or elements of it, of the experience within ISS Vanguard, you may not want that spoiled. So I left those cards out of the equation and just focused on the highlights from Awaken Realms as to what has actually changed. The cards and those secrets that you're going to find while moving through the gameplay, I'm going to leave that to you unless you specified in the comments down below or give me a thumbs up that you'd like to see me revisit ISS Vanguard and do a playthrough with all these new components. So let me know in the comments below, hit the like button, let me know that you want to see it, and I will gauge based on that response whether or not we go ahead and put the time and effort in to make that happen. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really hope this was helpful, and as always, keep on rolling solo.